Parasha Tetzaveh, wanted to share with you for Parasha Tetzaveh the teaching of, again, we start with the essay from David Schwartz of blessed memory, Zechrono Livracha, and he has his essays. So I want to talk to you about what David said this week. So David, hold on. David writes as follows: that this portion is notable for the fact that it's a continuation of Parashas Truma, and it begins with the command Tetzaveh that Hashem gives to Moshe to build the Mishkan. But at the beginning of the Parasha, we see the command to prepare the priestly garments for Aaron and his children. And afterwards comes the command to bring the sacrifices of the Miluim for the dedication of the Mishkan. What are the Miluim sacrifices? These are the sacrifices that Moshe brought to inaugurate the Mishkan for 7 days. Just want to pause here and go on a tangent that David was killed while he was doing his Miluim. Miluim in modern Hebrew is the reserves, that they do their month of reserve duty or their weeks of reserve duty. But the word Miluim comes from our portion of this week, and the word Miluim means perfection or completion. That this was the perfection of the building of the Mishkan was when you will do this Miluim ceremony. The Miluim ceremony was to take 30 loaves of bread, a bull, and 2 rams, and Moshe had to put them in the hands of Aaron and to wave them. Okay. This portion is most notable, or it's notable because Moshe is missing. That after Moshe was introduced, this is the only portion until Deuteronomy where Moshe's name is missing. And it doesn't need to be missing. Because why does it say Va'ata Tetzaveh? It could just say Vayidaber Hashem al Moshe Lemor. It's as though Moshe's name is intentionally missing from the portion. And that's something that is noticeable. The Zohar explains that the reason why Moshe's name is lacking is because in next week's portion, Moshe says, when Hashem says he's going to destroy the Jewish people after the sin of the golden calf, Moshe Rabbeinu says, do not destroy them, forgive their sin, and otherwise, if you don't, erase me from the book that you wrote. And so therefore, since Moshe said, erase me from the book, Hashem decides to take Moshe's name out of Parashat Tetzaveh as a fulfillment of that prophecy or that request. But this explanation is based upon the fact that the Torah is written out of chronology, because Tetzaveh comes before Kitisa. But, so this is the most accepted explanation of why Moshe's name is not found in this week's portion. The Baal HaTurim, and here I have the Baal HaTurim in front of me so I could cite it for you literally. Let me cite the Baal HaTurim, go to the primary source. The Baal HaTurim says as follows. Baal HaTurim writes, V'ata Tetzaveh lo izkir Moshe b'zeh seder. Moshe's name is not mentioned in this portion. Masha ein came b'kol HaChumash. This is a phenomenon that doesn't occur anywhere else in the Chumash. Now, the truth is, like we said, Moshe's name doesn't appear in Ekev or Eish Shoftim Kitzatzi and Tetzaveh. So he's not speaking exactly, but anyway, he means the reason, because he says Mecheni nami sifrecha asher kasavta, because he said, raise me from the book which you have written, and this is what he adds: V'kilat chacham afilu al tanai ba'ah. If a sage gives a curse, even if he makes it conditional, it's fulfilled. So, and some commentaries explain, because Moshe says to God in next week's portion, erase me from the book that you wrote, meaning that you just wrote. You just wrote Parasha Tetzaveh, because it's right before Kisisa, so therefore erase me from the book that you just wrote. Additionally, this is another explanation that the Baal HaTurim answers. Zua Parasha medaberet betachsisei kahuna. This portion speaks of the rituals of the priesthood, which was related to Aaron. And the kahuna, the Kohen Gadol, was supposed to be coming from Moshe. But because Moshe refused to accept the initial mission from God as his emissary, it was taken from him and given to Aaron. And so therefore, because Moshe would become distraught that he had lost out on this opportunity, his name was not mentioned in this portion, because he was destined to be the Kohen Gadol, but instead it was given to Aaron. So these are the first two, these are first three explanations, or two explanations. One is from the Zohar and the Baal HaTurim, and the Baal HaTurim gives two. One is this idea that the curse of a Chacham, even on a condition, is fulfilled, and therefore Moshe said, take me out of your book. And secondly, it's the idea that Moshe was supposed to be the Kohen Gadol, and so therefore he would have had too much turmoil, too much agmas nefesh. Another approach comes from the Gaon Mivilna, the Vilna Gaon. And he says the reason why Moshe is lacking is the reason, he says the reason why he's lacking, it's specifically, now usually this past week, we celebrated Zayin Adar. Last Friday was 7 Adar, but it was Adar 1. And this year's a leap year. When there's a leap year, we usually observe the Yortzeit in the second month of Adar. But usually Moshe's death comes out, the anniversary of Moshe's death, which is 7 Adar, usually comes out on the week of Parashas Tetzaveh. So the Vilna Gaon says that this is intentional, that this portion is typically read on the week in which it's the anniversary of Moshe's death. The reason why the Torah removed his name is to remind us of his awesome personality in the week that he died. So even though he has this awesome personality, it shows that we're lacking in Moshe, meaning to say it's like we're missing him from the world. So that's the answer of the Vilna Gaon. Then we come to position of the Chidushei Arim, the Ger Rebbe, and he explains so David quotes the Ger Rebbe, who says that each Torah scholar has a responsibility in each generation to arrange the words of Torah specifically for that generation in a real and practical way. And this is to make the words of the Torah relevant. And that's why it states in the Torah, that's why it states in the Talmud, Torah study is great because Torah study leads to action. Torah study is great because Torah study leads to action. And that's our responsibility to make the words of the Torah relevant. So Rav Eli Melech Biderman, by the way, you could see Rav Eli Melech Biderman, you could see his Torah thoughts. He speaks in Yiddish, but they're translated into English. You could see him on YouTube. Rav Eli Melech Biderman, following this path of the Chidushei Arim, also has this practice to expound the words of the Torah with a specific approach to lead us to an actual behavior. So that's what he wants to say here. David says, I want to take the same approach and explain how the lack of Moshe Rabbeinu from this Parasha, how it's relevant to our lives. So he says, from looking closely at the verses of the Torah, we see that the commandment to build the Mishkan has a very clear connection. This commandment is part of a larger group, a larger way of living life in the desert. The Mishkan, this tabernacle, as a place where the divine presence rests in the wilderness, prior to the temple being built in Jerusalem, demonstrates how we can have an ideal life or a utopian life in the future. That the Torah therefore takes out the name of Moshe because the Torah wants to teach us additional message. That after leaving Egypt and the receiving of the Torah, the Jewish people needed Moses like a baby needs their mother. At that time, the Jewish people needed Moses like a leader who was supernatural. And that's what Moshe was doing for us. He was splitting the sea. He was bringing down the man from Shemayim, a pillar of fire, a pillar of cloud. These are all symbols of that miraculous time. But while that necessity to lean on Moshe was so important for that specific time, it wasn't appropriate for future generations. This dependency upon Moshe was very dangerous. And it would be very, very dangerous for people to rely upon Moshe in this manner after the wilderness. And so therefore David, and this is his Chiddush, takes out the name of Moshe in order to teach us that the dependence on Moshe will need to be changed when we get a new ruler. And what's the behavior? So the Jewish people at that time, what's the new type of leadership we're going to get after the wilderness? So the Jewish people didn't recognize any other possible alternatives at that time. And that's the purpose of this portion. That when the Torah takes out the name of Moshe, it's being done to teach us the central point about the high priest, the Kohen Gadol, and his sons. Meaning to say, the very time Moshe's name is missing is to teach us this message about the importance of the Kohanim, of the other roles, the other authority figures. So it's to teach us that the Kohanim, as spiritual leaders, need to be an alternative to the leadership of Moshe. Let me just pause here for a moment. David's Chiddush is, this is David, usually cites sources for everything, but this is him talking. He's telling us that the Jewish people, when they left the wilderness, when they left Egypt, they were so reliant upon Moshe Rabbeinu and his supernatural leadership. But after the wilderness, when they entered in Canaan, they weren't going to have that type of leadership anymore. And so they were struggling, what will be an alternative leadership? And so this week's portion talks about an alternative model of leadership, the leadership of the Kohen Gadol, the leadership of Aaron and his sons. This leadership is in contrast to the leadership of Moses, and therefore it's specifically in this portion that Moshe's name is lacking. The Kohanim needed, continuing with David's words, the Kohanim needed at that time to carry the torch of leadership and to guide the people. The miraculous leadership of Moses was appropriate, but that was only for those days of the Exodus. Before entering into the land, the people needed to change. So the Kohanim represent a different type of leadership, a type of leadership that's not dependent upon prophecy, a type of leadership that's not dependent upon the supernatural. And that type of leadership is more appropriate for what we need after the generation of the wilderness. And the fact that Moshe is missing specifically in this portion makes that point. So now David says, it seems to me that at its core, there's a foundational or fundamental message here. And it's as follows. A person should require to gain religious and spiritual independence that's not dependent upon charismatic figures or messianism, but rather, even though these types of figures can make our jobs easier, nevertheless, it's not the appropriate approach. The appropriate approach is to look within ourselves and to guide ourselves without relying upon putting everything into the hands of charismatic leaders or messianists. And he cites the position of the Gemara that when the prophets died, prophecy ceased. So from that moment on, we shouldn't wait for prophecy and to start looking after it. A person should recognize that rather than being guided by the prophetic, charismatic leader, he should be guided by the law, the Jewish law called halakha. That's what a person needs to be guided by. Not the prophetic, charismatic leader, but by the halakha. Now, it's possible the prophetic, charismatic leader can inspire us and get us to another stage. But ultimately, the guide of our life, through thick and thin, the tried and true guide has to be halakha. And this is what the Mishnah tells us in Masechet Avot, Aseh lecha Rav, make for yourself a Rebbe. But that needs to be, says David, this needs to be with a clear understanding of the natural position of the Rebbe. Torah warns us by taking Moshe's name out that we shouldn't follow after supernatural leaders, magical leaders. And that is something, obviously, we should follow after Rebbes who can inspire us. However, that's like a jolt of inspiration. That's like taking a caffeine drink before you go on your day. The caffeine is not your day. Your day is your day. The caffeine is to help you through your day, to give you a little inspiration. And that's the concept. And he says, dangerous to just follow a path that deviates from this halakha. So David's answer is, why is Moshe Rabbeinu missing from this parasha of Tetzaveh? Is to teach us this fundamental idea that we need to be able to live without being totally dependent upon a charismatic leader. And so the charismatic leader will be missing from us in our life at some point. It's interesting, we should put this together with the idea that the Torah makes a very clear point that Moshe Rabbeinu dies. He dies at the end of the book, and also that we don't know where he's buried. One, we think that the reason why we don't know where he's buried is because if we knew where he's buried, that could become a place of worship. And number two, the point is that he died, that he's not alive, and life needs to go on without him. It's a terrible thing that some people want to say that certain rabbis are still alive. I know people who are at the Lubavitcher Rebbe's actual funeral. Lubavitcher Rebbe is a great man, but he died. I know people who are at his actual funeral who claim, even though they were at his funeral, they think he's still alive. So that's a tremendous tragedy that people are misusing his legacy in that manner. A tremendous, tremendous tragedy. Just want to say one more thought about following up what David was saying. I heard from somebody else who cited Rabbi Sachs that another reason why Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, why Moshe's name is missing, is because Moshe needed to make space for Aaron, because this was the portion of Aaron getting the priestly garments. This is the portion of Aaron and his sons being appointed to serve. So in that context, Moshe needed to pull back. He says, bring close to you Aaron. Your job is to dress him, to bathe him, to prepare the garments for him, then to do the inauguration for 7 days, and then to step back and recognize that this is Aaron's space and not your space, Moshe. That this is Aaron's space and not Moshe's. And you can imagine how difficult that would be. This is the central role for all of the people. And Moshe is not only stepping back, he's saying for all future generations, a person could give up his own honor, but he's giving up his children's honor in place of Aaron's sons. This was the portion where Moshe's greatness is truly felt, because this is the portion where he withdrew himself from the position of prominence and allowed his brother to take over it. Okay, anyway, I will pause here for a moment, see if anybody has any questions about this.